All right. Well, welcome everyone. This is a session which, quite frankly, is a follow-up to the last few words I spoke at last year's conference, where I talked about what I call the spiral model of solution-focused change. And in there, I described the background on that model, which was I developed it more or less working with people in chronic pain and also doing a bit of business coaching. And so all of the examples came from patients I worked with in a hospital here in Longmont, Colorado, some years ago. And then at the very end, in a moment of spontaneous vulnerability, I wanted to say that this model is something that wasn't just theoretical. It wasn't just about working with other people, but that I use it for myself because smack in the middle of my work at the hospital, working with patients with chronic pain, my daughter killed herself.
Mm.
And it totally disrupted my entire life. But I was using this model with others. And so, um, in the immediate horrific aftermath, where everything fell apart, I was thinking to myself, and I'll be honest, I said this out loud to my wife, who is also a solution-focused practitioner. What the hell good is this practice now to me, having just lost my daughter? Is this any use at all, or have I been fooling myself? And as I thought about it, I realized that I had shaped my life so much around my understanding of this model that, in fact, it became a kind of bedrock that I referred to over and over. So what I want to tell you today is a bit of my story. I want to illustrate how I've used this model on me because I have permission to say anything about this client. I don't have to worry about violating confidentialities, although I may drop in some of things that I've observed or worked with other suicide loss survivors, which is my exclusive clientele these days. And so I'll be telling my story and relating it to this model. And in a way, what I'm inviting each one of you to do is see how you relate to it, because the model I'm going to share with you is not rocket science, nor is it formally approved by any SFBT institution of credentialing, licensing, or other programs of training. It's just what I do. And I want it to be very clear. This is the way I think it through. This is the way I work with it. It's very personal. And I'll talk a little about how I developed that. However, I realized that I said this session might be of interest to those who have lost someone to suicide, or to those who work with someone who may have lost someone to suicide. And I know that some people also work with those who are suicidal. And so I want to be very clear. I'm not talking about prevention at all today. I'm talking about what they call postvention. What do you do after the fact? How do you survive this horrible thing? But the way I want to start is just, I want to get personal. And so I'm going to invite you. I want to tell you, I'm going to talk about this young woman a bit today. This is my daughter, Beth. Can you all see her? 1 year before she took her own life. She's here with me. And she's the reason I'm doing all of this. And when I work with suicide loss survivors, I'm aware that those people are in the room with us. We all bring them with us in our hearts and our minds. So I always begin by acknowledging the people we've lost. So what I'd like to do is invite you, if you're comfortable, is to unmute or put it in the chat if you like. If you have lost someone to suicide, what is their name and their relationship to you? My daughter, Beth, died in 2018. She was 28 years old. She's here with me. Who's here with you?
Would you prefer us to put this in the chat, or do you, is it
But
better if we speak as quick as?
yeah, I'm happy with you saying it out loud since we're
So
small.
my mother's brother and his son.
Could you say their names?
Yeah, yeah, Frank and Peter. Um, the son was quite young. He was in his early 30s, and he hanged himself in his closet. And his father, having been had mental instability, ended his life by going and sitting on a bench on a snowy day, and simply the cold got him.
Thanks. Anyone else bring someone with you?
I always bring Byron. Um, it's a little complicated. He was the adopted son of my best friend's parents.
Hmm.
So my best friend died of diabetes, and his parents a few years later adopted Byron, who'd had a rough start in life and he didn't make it. He killed himself when he was 16.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah, Tammy.
Um, so I'm dating a widower, and his wife committed suicide by gun.
Hmm.
And whenever I hear suicide, I think about his wife.
Hmm.
And yeah, they were married 31 years, and I can only imagine the horrific loss and sharing that experience with him and seeing him grow post
Mhm.
has been a blessing to me. And her name was Balbina.
Yeah, Dina.
Yeah, it was someone that I didn't actually know that well for that long. Someone I went to college with, but we were both singer-songwriters
Hmm.
who messaged me after a show, said we should write a song together. We hung out together maybe like 2 hours, wrote a song together, and then less than a month later he killed himself. Jake Sibley.
Hmm.
Uh,
Laura.
My wife's mother um,
Hmm.
died of suicide before we ever met. So I've never met her, but the impact of that loss, the ripples continue. And then I lost a client to suicide that I had worked with pretty intensively for about 2 years. Um,
That's a
then
big,
yeah, and then I've supported multiple parents and other family members.
okay. Anyone else before we move on? I don't want to put anyone under pressure, but I really like to acknowledge everyone that's come with us. So if you're okay, take a moment in silence and just absorb the fact that we're here with all these other people and all the people that we touch in our work, and just honor their memory for a moment. Okay, thank you. What I'd like to do is I'd like to jump in and show you the model that I developed over a number of years as a way, and sort of the background for this is that even though I work with some clients as a psychotherapist, um, that isn't the main thing I do. I'm actually more of an adult educator, and I had training in positive psychology coaching prior to learning about solution-focused therapy. And I come with a very strong adult education mindset, which is that curiously, one of the most effective ways that adults learn is self-directed learning. We had entire modules on it in my graduate training in adult education. And I was amazed because we so value expertise and degrees and certifications and graduate programs and continuing education that we don't realize that one of the most powerful ways people learn is their own way, through their own motivation, seeking out answers to their own questions and solutions to their own problems. So I very highly value self-directed learning, and I have been a self-directed learner my entire life. I've read thousands of books. Whenever I'm interested in a field, I just master it, mostly through books. And I'm just an avid reader. And I'm also a writer. So a little bit more about my background that may be useful is that I started out with a master's degree in earth science. So I had 7 solid years of training right through graduate school in science, scientific method, I think scientifically. So science is really important. And you'll hear where this comes in my story and what works for me. I'm also a writer and have been writing since the 5th grade. Not publishing, but I did get published in high school. And I've been a poet. So there's an artist in me. And the artist finally found the media that worked was words mostly. But the other thing about being an artist, because I used to do abstract painting, is that I visualize everything. If you talk to me about an abstract process or you put a bunch of bullet points on a screen, I'm going to diagram it on a whiteboard. And the way I worked with every single client was I always had a huge whiteboard right behind me, and I was on that whiteboard the whole time. I barely ever sat down, and I would diagram what they said. I'd take things down, I'd draw lines. And so that's how my brain works, which is why I ended up coming up with a visual model. The other thing worth knowing is that while I was so after I was an earth scientist, I became a professional writer for 30 some years. And I was self-employed, so I was both a writer and then on the side, I was doing everything else I wanted to do. And I became a meditation teacher in the 90s and the early 2000s. That's important too, because that's a way that I've been helping myself and others ground with all the horrific, catastrophic emotions that happen in the aftermath of suicide. So, and as a writer, and as an adult educator, I used to teach adults how to write their life stories and how to craft them, how to shape them, how to start, how to think about this huge mass that is your life story. So these are all background to what I'm going to end up bringing into my own healing process after my daughter dies. And the last thing I was doing, as I said, was working as a pain management specialist in a hospital where I used all these principles. So at the heart of it all was I wanted to teach people how to help themselves, how to become self-directed learners, or how to self-manage their pain, not I will manage your pain. They went to all the doctors and the doctors stuck them with needles, they gave them pills, they laid them on tables, they cut them, they injected, they did all kinds of things. And they would show up in my office and they go, what are you going to stick me with? And it'd be, I'm going to stick you with some ideas and some practices, and you're going to figure it out. So when my daughter died, I brought all of this to me, and I was like, I'm not looking for experts to help me. I'm looking for my expertise to survive this. And here's the model that I was teaching to clients and patients in the hospital. So I'm now sharing my screen. Can you all see that? All right. So I want to kind of step through this briefly because I'm going to come back to pieces of it, but I want you to see the model, first of all, in its entirety. And as someone once said to me, their first take was, oh God, there's so much going on here. And it was like, oh, you have no idea how this was simplified, how much I condensed. But the one thing I always want to point out, and this is kind of what I pointed out to almost everyone that I worked with at some point, not necessarily the first thing, is that I deliberately designed it. It's an iteration. What my understanding of solution-focused practice is you do something, you do it again, you do it again, and every small step takes you closer to your preferred future. So there's a sense of a cyclical nature to it rather than just the linear scale. And that was really important. I wanted to visualize that. You're going to be cycling through things for a while, and especially in the aftermath of suicide, you just cycle through all kinds of stuff all the time. But what we're trying to cycle through here are things that are helping you reach your preferred future. So I deliberately put the preferred future at the center of this diagram. And that's what I'm going to focus on a lot in this today, talking about my experiences, how I kept the future at the center of all my healing processes. But let's step through how do we start? Where do we start? Most people arrive in today when I do a suicide loss survivor support group, which I've been doing monthly for a number of years with breaks in between. But when they show up, if they're brand new, they arrive with a problem. It's the only reason they're there. And I know what the problem is, the core problem, the presenting problem, if you will. Someone they love died. That's the problem. And this is how I always describe it. Solution-focused process starts with what you don't want. Now, we can spend a little bit of time on that, but I'm going to shift to where do we go from there? Quickly, usually, we try to go to what do you want instead, right? If the problem gets you in the door, and I don't believe I ever had anyone arrive in my office who didn't have a problem or problems in mind, but I had to listen to that. But what I'm listening for is what do they want instead of this? So this gets very curious now if you think about suicide, grief, and bereavement. Because the problem is, and I'll tell you this, I did not want my daughter to be dead. Okay? What you do not want. And so if you asked me and you offered me a miracle question, said, what do you want instead? If a miracle happened, I would just say, I want her to be alive. Now, I'm going to leave that there for the moment because I'm going to suggest that that's a reasonable desire. Now, what do you do with that? My daughter is dead. I wish she were alive. I really do. And if you know anything about the huge emotions that follow a suicide loss, you also know there's a thing that's quite common called magical thinking that takes place. And we often begin to imagine how we can stop this, how we can change it, how it's not real, and things like that. And so I'll just openly admit I engaged in magical thinking as well. So there's a huge gap between death and wishing someone were alive. Now, there's far more to the preferred future, and we'll get to that shortly, but this is where we start scaling. Where are you today then? So we throw in the scale. So this is three steps in the simplistic model that I've come up with. You have a problem, you have a preferred future, and then you scale the difference between them. And usually we say, relative to your preferred future, where are you today? And people will usually answer somewhere in the low end of the scale. But if you said, relative to bringing my daughter back from the dead, where am I? Well, wouldn't I be at a 0? So I will get to that in a moment, where you are today. Now, what I'd suggest is that almost no one ends up at 0 or starts at 0, almost no one, if you explore the preferred future in more depth. And so this is where my understanding of the process was always that what makes you more than 0 or more than 2 or 1 are exceptions when the problem is not happening. And this was always very interesting working with chronic pain patients because I'd ask them, when is the problem, which for them was pain. I'm in pain. I don't want to be in pain. When are you not in pain? But if you're talking to a suicide loss survivor and you say, when is the person you lost not dead? It can be a very strange question. But let me leave it there. Now, this is where the iterations begin, because there's a flip side to when the problem doesn't happen. And that is, you want something. When does it actually happen? That's when does the future you wish actually happen in the present? And remember, it's always even a little bit, right? Even a little tiny bit of the future. Just like an exception is, when does a problem not happen? Even a little bit. So I began to realize in listening to the way people in the solution-focused training world would discuss problems in the preferred future, that in some ways these are or could be the same thing, just flipped. The exception is when it doesn't happen. The future is when it does happen. Now, there's an interesting difference here between when something doesn't happen and when what you want. Because so if a person came in, and a lot of the people I work with are just traumatized with the most extreme emotions they've ever encountered. And I will admit, nothing in my life ever hurt as bad as when Beth killed herself. Nothing. And I could barely stand to breathe at times. So it was a huge physiological thing. And if you ask me about how I felt, which is how a lot of open-ended suicide support groups do, they'll ask how you're doing or how you're feeling. It would be intolerable pain. What do I want? And then the question became, that's interesting. Do I want to be free of this pain? No. I want the pain to be tolerable. But if I were free of the grief, the agony, the yearning, the anguish, the regret, it would mean I'm negating the person who is gone. And so it is very interesting to discover that many of the people that I work with will tell you they don't want to not feel horrible. They don't want to not feel bad. They just want to be able to handle it. So at times, when you talk about feelings, you may find that what you want is not to feel happy. You don't want to feel joyful. You don't want to feel good. You just want to be able to embrace it or hold it. So I see the future happening now and the exceptions as two different ways to look at it, because the answer may not be a pure opposite. You can feel numb, but that may not be how you want to feel. So I'm going to talk a little about how it is that I worked with some of these, but I see these as two ways to work with suicide loss survivors and how I worked with myself. Let's see. So if you see things that are happening that are working for you, exceptions and realizations where the future becomes real, then of course the principle is do more of what's working. And we do those in small steps. And this is where you start combining the circular, the iterative kind of motion of this with the linear. So you're moving toward your preferred future. Now, at this point, I would always turn back then if it was relevant, because sometimes you realize that how am I going to deal with this thing, which is unlike anything I've ever encountered before. Losing my daughter was not like something I'd encountered before. But had I had grief experience before? Yes. In fact, my mother died 7 months before my daughter. And so I knew how to handle grief. So if I were going to draw upon some of my existing knowledge of what works, I would look back at how did I handle this before in the past? And even though it's different, can I bring any of that forward? What would work for me now? Can I adapt that and use it again? Meanwhile, you keep doing the things that are working. And this brings you slightly up the scale toward your preferred future. And then finally, there's if what you're doing isn't working, do something different. So experiments is what I call them. I use these words because I think they resonate: exceptions, experiences, and experiments. And So often, here's where it's very interesting. If you ask people about what's not working, they know, for example, that drinking alcohol and doing a lot of drugs is not helping them. They'll know that certain things aren't helping, that numbing out and avoiding all the time isn't helping necessarily. So you do something different. And what I found for myself was I was going to start trying some really almost radically different things and how they help me. So you iterate until you're close enough to your preferred future. You never have to really reach that preferred future to feel okay, like you're fine and you can continue on your own. So a quick recap here is that there are things in your past you can bring forward, as I understand it, that apply to the situation at hand that help you get to the future you want. There are present solutions, which are the exceptions when the problem doesn't happen, realizations. These are happening right now. You do more of those. And then finally, I call them future solutions. This is something I'm going to try. And I'm going to see how it works. And then I'll scale it. I'll check it out. So that's the model. What I'd like to do now is I want to tell you how I actually did this myself. And I'm going to stop the screen share because I like to see your faces. And if you are here and you're hiding and you're comfortable, I'd like to see your face. So I'm going to show you a couple things. How I use this in one way is here is the thing all printed out. And what do you see all over it? It's a way of me tracking things that mattered, okay? So this is one way to do it. I didn't do this in the moment, but I did this recently to sort of walk through my experience. So what I'd like to do is focus on one problem I had, because one question I asked some people, did you hear me say I want to focus on a problem? That's fine. I often will ask people when they arrive, now this is a strange question. You know how we start before we ask a question about the miracle, for example, I want to ask you a strange question. Well, the strange question that I will often ask suicide loss survivors at the right moment, and I don't always do it, is I understand you lost someone to suicide that you love, and that's painful. But how exactly is their suicide a problem for you? And to help them, I'll often say, how is that suicide a problem for you physically? How does it affect your body, your sleep, your diet, your fatigue levels? How does it affect you psychologically, like mentally or emotionally, which is often the thing we think is the biggest? And how does it affect you socially? Right? So a suicide can devastate your social network. You can lose friends. I did. So these are all the problems that people bring with them. And this is a thing that I've used with some of them, which is, the problem is what you don't want, what you brought here today, which is for them, someone killed himself. That's a huge problem for me. How is this a problem for you? And they'll list the things that are causing them problems. Now, you'd say, well, am I digging into the problem? No, I'm exploring it enough to do two things. One is to give them some possibilities for how to see and frame their own preferred future, but also to validate them. You cannot bypass everything that's wrong with them, and they'll stay in the room with you because they've been stigmatized so badly, most of them. They've been hurt so badly. They've frightened off their closest friends, relatives. People turn away at the mere mention of suicide. So you have to embrace that. But what do you do with it once you've nailed it down and you said, this is a problem? So I'm going to say, what I did with that. But then I'll also say to switch to the preferred future, and I'm telling them we're talking about a preferred future. What do you want instead? And that's where you do the flip. That's where I say do the flip. And so you framed a problem in terms of what you don't want, negative. What is it you want positively? So, and then I'll start listing things they want. And then, of course, I'll follow up with the other question right there, which is, what difference would that make if you got that? So, and then you have a bunch of problems and you have a bunch of aspects of a preferred future. What do you want to work on? And so usually in the groups I'm doing, they're very short-lived, so we can only like focus on one thing. So I'm going to focus on a couple things I want to point out to you. Within 1 week of my daughter's death, I knew I would write a book about her. I knew that. And this is the book. And so what I want to quote to you is a few things. I just want to read a few of these things to you so you see what I was looking at, what I wanted. So here's what I said here. I'm going to read just a couple excerpts. This is uncomfortable to admit aloud in the blinding light of another blank white page, but I was legitimately mystified at the sheer brutality and longevity of my own grief when Beth killed herself. At that point, tragically, we enjoyed, for all intents and purposes, little to no meaningful relationship whatsoever. Apart from our unbreakable genetic bond, she was almost a complete stranger. So then, what had I actually lost when she erased herself from the whiteboard of my life? Nothing, really. Well, nothing but hope. A thread of hope, which was at this time more of a wistful, fading wish, that one day Beth might wake up and find that she missed and needed her dad the way he still missed and needed her, and that she might come home again. And together we might reanimate the corpse of our relationship as father and child, as friends or equals or something. I don't know. For years I had clung to the iron hull of that hope like a barnacle. It kept me afloat, but when the ship went down, I went with it. So if I told you that, what do you know about what I want? I want my daughter to come home. I want my daughter to come back. I want to know her. I want to have a relationship with her. I want to bring her back from the dead. So I found this thing years ago, one of the second book after Terry Pichot's wonderful book on solution-focused therapy. The second one I read was this Brief Coaching by Insoo and Peter Szabo. And in there, I encountered this wonderful take on the miracle question. Here's a case study from the field. Says, sometimes a client's answer to the miracle question is quite the opposite what we think would make their life better. One client's answer to the miracle question was, my husband will drop dead. So if the miracle happens, hubby is dead, right? When this happened to Insoo, without missing a beat, she asked the woman, suppose he did drop dead. What would you do then that you're not doing right now? And the woman proceeded to list a bunch of things she would have done and then proceeded to do them. So what I thought that gave me permission to do, quite frankly, was to want my daughter to come back from the dead. How could that be accomplished? So one thing that I did was, as I thought through, when I went through these things and jotted things down, I allowed myself to want that, knowing that literally it can't happen. So why did I want that? If you look at my preferred future, the problem I had was I'll never see Beth again. I'll never have a relationship with her again. I'll never get to know who she was, this mysterious stranger. And then I flipped those over, and here's what I said. Well, what difference would it make if she came back from the dead? Here's some of the things I said. I could ask her to explain why she did what she did. I would be able to know her again and feel close to her. She would get to live out her life as she had dreamed for herself. She might be able to find love and belonging, which she had never found in life. And maybe we could forgive each other. So I started asking myself, when exactly is Beth not dead? I know this sounds weird, but I'll tell you what happened. On that scale, I was not a zero. Beth was alive every time I dreamt about her. I had a lot of dreams about her for the first 2 or 3 years, always as a small child. And they were wonderful. They were not terrifying. Another time Beth was not alive is every time I read the writings she left behind, which she left voluminous writings and very random files and notes and journals. When I read her writings, she was alive again in my heart, my mind, and my imagination. She became alive when I told stories about her, which I did all the time to everyone who would listen. And when others told stories to me about her that I'd never heard, Beth was alive for a little while, right? And then she was dead. But those were exceptions to the problem. So what I began to do is look at when my preferred future happened. I would say, when is it that she's alive? And as Terry has always said, it's not random. It's something you did, you chose, you figured out. And these were things that I began doing very consciously. She was alive for me every time I figured out another piece of the puzzle of why she killed herself. And I went after understanding why she killed herself like a scientist, an investigative journalist, a lawyer, or a kid who never stops asking why. And the work I do now, I sort of characterize for the people I work with, I call it, we're exploring the why question. So when I figured out a small piece of the puzzle, it was energizing to me. Here is a small piece of my daughter's life I never knew again, and now she's starting to come into focus. Another thing was I began writing to her letters, journaling, and always in this to her directly, Dear Beth. And there were agonizing pourings out and questions and stuff like that. But when I wrote to her, Beth was alive. And I was like, okay, now I'm doing this intentionally. And then when I understood, when I began to read her writings, and I read everything she had written, hundreds of pages, probably at least 50 times through, I began to actually be able to have her, hold her in my head as if I could hear her voice now. It wasn't me from the outside looking in. So small steps I began taking were that I decided I was going to write a book about her. And within 6 months, what I did is the first thing I wrote was a letter to her that I posted on LinkedIn about the first 4 days when I discovered she had died. And I deliberately put it out there to see if people would respond to it in a way, or if I could get the energy to keep going. And some years later, it became the first chapter of my book. It was very well received. And I was moving up the scale toward the future where I was going to bring my daughter back from the dead. I want to read you one more thing that I wrote in the August, 1 month after she died, August 2018. I wrote a sticky note and I put it on my computer. And it said, I'm not trying to accept her death. I'm not trying to heal, move on, or get over it, as people say. I'm striving with every ounce of my being to guide my daughter home like Virgil in the Inferno. She cannot find her way alone. And at that point, I was seriously engaged in magical thinking that if I could figure out how she died, I could stop her from killing herself by simply going back in time and reversing it. What I want to say is that I did figure it out, and I did bring her back from the dead in this book. Because among all the things that I wanted to do, I wanted to create a memorial to her too. I did not want her to be forgotten. But in writing the book, how did I come up with writing? Is that a thing everyone who loses someone to suicide should do? Should they write a book, and a very thick book? It's a big book. Well, as I did all this research over a period of years, I figured out why she killed herself. And then I had to tell the story to string it together into what psychologists call a narrative. And Martin talked beautifully about this morning, how a narrative helps you make sense of something. Its purpose is not just to throw a bunch of anecdotes out there, but to actually tell a story from beginning to end that starts to give meaning. And in teaching people how to write their own life stories, this is what I always said: you cannot tell your life story. It's impossible. You have to tell a story. You have to find a thread, and they have to string events along that thread that lead to from where it began to where it ended. So I started this story with the ending, and then I circled right back through my daughter's entire life, and I reconstructed the whole thing from hundreds of pages of documents. I got files from the Peace Corps where she was treated, files from former psychotherapists, and then mostly her journals and my memories. And I just rebuilt her entire life from scratch. And when it was done, I remember telling a friend of mine, it feels like I breathed out for the first time in 4 years. It took me 4 years. And at that point, I remember scaling my preferred future. How well did I bring my daughter back from the dead? And I gave it a 9 because I got so effectively into her mind and heart that during the writing of this book, and much of the book was written intuitively, and the structure came sort of out of my psyche mysteriously as I was unfolding the story. I had spontaneous conversations with her that I actually recorded and dropped into the book, where I was asking her for help to get through the narrative. And then I left them in the book because it was part of the process. And there were other times when I would endeavor to imagine what would have happened if this event had never occurred or it had occurred differently and the universe split. So I used some of the theoretical of physics around the multiverse. And the book has at least 12 different parallel universes in it where something changed in Beth's life story and she did not die as a consequence. It's a way of exploring the what if we do. So I was using fiction. I was doing, and so these were some of the experiments that I did. The experiments were, let me try to write something that's not entirely linear. It's not all analytical. It's not all from my point of view. And where I felt like the biggest breakthrough for me in bringing my daughter back from the dead was after having read everything about her for so long, having reconstructed her life into a 700-page source document in chronological order. 3 years it took me to do that. It took me a year to write the book, working almost daily. In the middle of writing the ending of the book, unsuspectingly, I realized I needed to hand it over to Beth. I just turned the keyboard over and she wrote 2 entire chapters in the first person, explaining another part of the story which I had never covered. I just want to share a little piece about that. there was a quote I found by Thomas Bernhard from a book called Gargoyles, which I dropped in here. It says, now he understood her, who had lived beside him for so many years and been loved, but never understood. You were never truly together with the one you loved until the person in question was dead and actually inside you. And I experienced that where I was having a conversation with my daughter. I called it via Ouija keyboard. I would turn over the keyboard to her and we would converse using the keyboard. And at some point, here's what we said. I was trying to explain to her why I had to write something really difficult in this book and how it needed to be said. And so she says to me, she's talking to me, and she's trying to explain to me who she is in that moment. Like, who am I talking to now? And she said, she called herself the ghost in the machine. And I said, Beth, is that all you are? And she said, look at your fingertips, Dad. I said, yes, what? She said, who's typing right now? I rest my case. And I said, oh, you know what this suggests, Beth? And she said, what? I said, you're always here, in here, deep inside. You're not somewhere out there. And then she asked me, why is this making you cry? I said, because I just realized you and I are closer now than when you were alive. You had to die for me finally to know you, for the chasm between us to collapse to zero, for you to inhabit my brain and my blood and my fingertips. You don't even have your own mouth. It's heartbreaking. And then she made a wisecrack, and we ended up laughing. And what I did was I gave the book to her at one point to tell her own story. And by doing that, for 2 entire chapters, Beth was entirely alive again to me. So what I want to say to you is that on this scale, using this process, I ended up reaching a 9 on here. She was not literally alive, but I had worked through in my own mind with such vivid imagination what she would have done if she had not killed herself, if she had stayed alive, and she wrote her own book about her suicide, that I felt I knew her in a way I'd never known before. And then I gave her something that she couldn't give herself. I gave her a whole new life where she found love, she found belonging, and she went on with her life in another universe. And to this day, Beth and I still exchange messages via Ouija keyboard. And what I have to add, just for context, I know we're getting near the end here, is that neither Beth nor I believe in the afterlife. This is all in my imagination. So what I want you to know is that you can use this process and you're going to end up inviting people to do bizarrely weird things that work deeply for them. I'm a writer, and this is what worked for me. So I didn't want her to be dead, and I brought her back to life. And I feel wonderful. When I wrote that book, my wife watched me. You always say, who would notice? Barbara watched me coming down from 8 hours of pounding at the keyboard, and I was lit up. And I would tell her how much joy I was feeling because I knew my daughter in a way I'd never known her while she was alive. Partly because I had hundreds of pages of documents she never let me see, but I had brought her inside my own body. This is what I consider the possibilities of just having a simple solution-focused model. Everything about this was totally unique to me. And I would never suggest this is what anyone else should do. And in the few minutes left, I just want to go, first of all, breathe out, and then say, what emerges for you in hearing this bizarre story of resurrection? Solution-focused resurrection.
The importance of telling their story
Hmm.
and for the listeners to hear that person's story about their beloved person.
I think there is a power, Jay, in that you have walked this journey. And so when you're working with people, you know, there's a whole pile of things that they know you know without being told and without being said. And I think that is, yeah, in this particular space is really, really useful and helpful. So, yeah.
And I would add to that I can't possibly know what they should do.
Oh, no.
Just
But
because they get it, and they need that resonance. But you're right, I still
the
need
resonance of actually,
for that.
you know, you have absolutely no idea how I'm feeling. No, you're absolutely right. I don't.
Mm.
Do know how I felt.
Mhm.
And I have been in this space. And that allows a validity of the space. And I think there are some aspects of counseling where we can be without having done the walk. But this really does feel for me like one where when you haven't walked it,
Mm.
you may not be able to be what the client needs you to be. Just a thought. Thank you for your courage.
Hmm.
Thank you for showing up. Anything else, Laura?
Um, I knew a hospice nurse once who told me years ago that one of the things that she learned is that when people that we love die, our relationship with them doesn't end. It just changes.
Mhm.
And I think your story really exemplifies that. And the other thing that I think it exemplifies for me is just the profound humility on my part as a clinician that I don't know how, I don't have an answer about how they're going to get there. Each person has their own spiral and their own process and their own, and miracles can happen in that space that I could never anticipate.
Mhm.
And the importance of staying humble about when somebody wants something that I think, well, that's not doable. Like I know. Like I could ever take that away. Like but when people yearn for something, a way oftentimes can be found in a way that I could never anticipate. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
I also think it's a kind of a testimony to the staying power of a preferred future. Can
Mm,
do this within 1 week. Um,
mm,
I hung on to that and never let it go for 4 years. And then, of course, there are many other aspects of my preferred future, one of which was to see if I could help others get through this horrific nightmare. And I had to learn an entirely new field. But now it was coming out from within me. And here I am doing this because my hope is that a few of the simple things I've learned would be useful. Um, and as I always say about the spiral model too, is it's just my version of how I condensed everything I learned initially from Terry and also then from dozens of other books, and that there's nothing sacrosanct, but if it's useful, it is a thing that I've been sharing with my clients now, and I'll give it to them, I'll talk it through, and then we'll explore all of those pieces for them. And in the end, they can walk away and they've got something where I started. The idea is self-directed. They can be self-directed. And to me, that's why somehow simplifying this process and then illustrating it is a wonderful way people can walk away and get it, and be on their own. So I'm aware that we just clocked 3 o'clock and you're probably going to rush off to something else, and I'm going to get a drink.
Well earned.
Thank you for showing up. And we'll
Thank
see
you.
you in the future. Anybody ever wants to talk to me, look me up, email me. I got a couple pen pals here. I'd be glad to talk to you.
What is your email address?
It's jay@bpshealth.org. bpshealth.org. And I do like to hear back from people because, it makes me feel like I've accomplished something useful in the world. So if you liked something, or if it raised a question, or you think, I'm not sure I buy that, that's fine too. Heather, by the way, is quoted on the back of my book. So there's a wonderful quote. And if you like Heather, surely you want to buy my book.
You do want to buy the book. There's nothing else like it in the world.
And I think Amen is the place to.
Mm.
Thank you guys, and see you later.
Cheers. Thank you.